You're listening to I Have Some Notes, a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported.
Hey Greg, I have a pitch for you. A beautifully shot, dramatic thriller with sexy movie stars and a bombastic soundtrack that slowly, mysteriously reveals its unique sci-fi premise, all culminating in a thoughtful exploration of relevant themes.
Oh wow, that sounds incredible, actually. That's everything I could ask for from a film. You're describing kind of the perfect movie, to be honest.
It's all yours, so long as you don't ask any questions or think about it at all.
This almost sounds too good to be true. Wait, am I in a simulation right now?
I said don't ask any questions.
Alright, I have some notes.
Welcome, everyone, to I Have Some Notes, the movie podcast with cuts, keeps, punch-ups, and tweaks on mediocre movies. I'm your host, Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
And I'm Greg Beaver.
And today we are discussing Don't Worry, Darling, from that year that was, 2022.
What a movie.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to watch this ever, and then Greg suggested we do it for the podcast. And I was like, okay. I kind of wish I spoiled it for myself because I assumed I would never watch it. And then my partner Amanda watched it without me, and she was like, yeah, you're not missing much. Yeah, and then we had to watch it.
Yeah, this movie definitely kind of hits our sweet spot. It got very mediocre reviews, and it feels like a movie that's kind of just half-baked. So kind of right in our wheelhouse, really.
Mm-hmm.
If you go by the Rotten Tomatoes percentage, because it's sitting at 33%, which honestly had me expecting a complete train wreck from beginning to end, and it wasn't that.
No. This is almost the tragedy of Don't Worry, Darling. Technically, it is a very good movie. And I mean that in like all of the technical aspects of filmmaking, it's very good. It's well directed, it's well acted, it's well shot. The cinematography is great, the costuming is great. It looks visually spectacular. It's a great film to watch. It's just that the script wasn't quite there.
Yeah, speaking of the Tomatoes score, it's got a 38% review, but 74% audience score, which partly I just think is like Harry Styles fans upvoting it. But I also, we were talking about this before, I really liked the movie as I was watching it. I was entertained throughout. I was engaged throughout.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it was done, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What the hell did I just... No, cut. And I think an audience member might leave being like, well, I was engaged and entertained for 2 hours. I got my movie worth. Whereas someone who writes and reviews film for a living has to stop and think about it and goes, God damn it, this is nonsense. So
yeah,
that's how I explained the discrepancy.
The movie is definitely engaging, and I agree. It grabbed me really quickly, and I wanted to see where it was going. I was just really disappointed in the destination. It ends really abruptly, and I was like, that's it? That's where this was going? I feel kind of let down by that.
Kind of let down is an understatement. I felt extremely frustrated.
Yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't get that feeling of being let down necessarily. I guess I felt about the same throughout the entire thing. Like the twist. I had been apprised of the twist before, like Liam, and it just didn't hit me with a ton of bricks the way that I've noticed a lot of other reviewers it did. Most people I've listened to online sort of described it as a great movie right up until the third act. I don't know. I don't think there's a drop in quality, and like I was willing to let the movie take me where it wanted to go, even if I thought it was like a little silly. But it didn't bother me because I was more interested in like what it was trying to say and whether it was going to stick the landing in any particular way. Does it? No, not really. I mean, you could kind of argue that maybe it does in some sense, but the third act is a little messy and a little compressed, and I think that sort of undoes a lot of some of the good work that might have been done earlier on in the movie.
Yeah. Scott, was the twist a reveal for you? Did you spoil it for yourself going into it?
I did not. I definitely kind of went into it knowing that it was going to be Stepford Wivesy, but I didn't know going in that it was a VR twist. So that did surprise me. Well, surprise is not necessarily the right word, but
you at least didn't know when you hit play that it was actually set in 2023 and not 1950.
I mean, I had my suspicions, but yeah. I described it as feeling kind of like an episode of The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror that would have worked as like a half hour to 45-minute premise, but it got stretched out to 2 hours, and they didn't quite do all the work of building it out. And that's, I feel like that's kind of the case. It's an interesting premise that they just didn't quite completely explore to its fullest, and they kind of ended up rushing in the end. An ending that, again, may have worked in a shorter episode of television.
That's interesting that you say it was like just maybe should have been compressed, because I feel like they spent a lot of effort and a lot of work building it up. They were just building foundations and struts and walls that didn't go anywhere. They didn't need to, like that episode of The Simpsons when they build Ned Flanders a new house, where it's like, that's a load bearing poster. Like, what was any of that for? Why did you do that?
Yeah, it's
time that could have been spent on.
If I can rephrase that a little bit, maybe it's less that they spent all that time building stuff out, so much as they spent so much time building stuff out that they didn't have time for the climax anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
And then a lot of it just ended up not being done. And that's, I think, more kind of what I mean by that.
Yeah.
I think I think I disagree, but let's set up the movie first, and then we'll get right into it.
So yeah, of course, Don't Worry, Darling came out in 2022, directed by Olivia Wilde, who also appears in the movie, written by Katie Sieberman, who wrote Booksmart, baffling because that's a great movie. Carrie Van Dyke, Shane Van Dyke. I love that Greg added the note. They wrote Titanic 2. That's not real. What?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
There's a Titanic 2?
There's a Titanic 2. I've watched it. It's terrible. It's like it's almost like an asylum movie.
Damn.
Or it might actually be an asylum movie.
That's like famously the one movie you can't make a sequel to. What?
Which is, I think, why they did it.
Okay, I guess I gotta go look into that. That was just news to me, literally, in reading our notes here.
Those two cats, I think, are like, they get story by credits, so like Katie Silverman's like the screenwriter. So I think like they're just like producers who got like, they had a couple ideas or whatever, and they get their credits in.
Fair. The cast, of course, stars Florence Pugh as Alice, Harry Styles as Jack, Chris Pine as Frank, Olivia Wilde as Bunny, Kiki Lane as Margaret, Gemma Chan as Shelley, Frank's wife. Nick Kroll was in it. I also really was excited to see Nick Kroll in a movie, but too bad it's this one. Why don't we go right? Because there's so much to unpack with this thing that I'd love to just get our audience caught up. If you haven't seen it, also spoilers, but you know this show. That's how it works. Anyway, let's go to the plot summary.
Frank has built something truly special. What he's created out here, it's a different way, a better way.
Once unfamiliar faces, strangers one and all, now one brave family.
I was here when you got here?
Yeah, you sleep in the bedroom. That's good, just breathe.
Most of my patients have had nightmares.
Violet, where did you meet Bill?
We met on a train.
To Boston. You dropped your ticket, and he bent down, picked it up, gave it to you, right?
Thank you for your loyalty. What are we doing?
Changing the world.
They're lying about everything.
I've been waiting for someone like you, someone to challenge me. Like a good girl.
Amidst the arid sun of the Mojave Desert lies the idyllic town of Victory. During the day, Alice cooks and cleans her perfect home while her perfect husband works for a big company claiming to change the world. At night, they drink and play games. Their favorite game is kitchen table sex. Alice is happy, it seems, until she witnesses a plane crash in the distant mountains. In heels and a dress, she hikes into the desert in search of the crash, but instead discovers a strange round building. When she investigates, she blacks out. What happened to the plane? Don't worry, darling, it won't come up again. She awakes back in her perfect bed, confused and disoriented. After being gaslit by both husband and doctor, a series of independently bizarre events leads Alice to question the real purpose of the town of Victory and her existence within it. When she confronts the town's extremely handsome and sexy leader with dreamy eyes you can just stare into forever and ever and... Wait, sorry, where was I? Right, she confronts Frank, and her world unravels, and it becomes clear she is trapped and must escape.
Before the break, you were mentioning that you don't necessarily think the movie leads to anything, and I think I disagree. It may not be necessarily the most satisfying thing that it leads to, but like each of the main women characters in the movie sort of, to me, kind of represent a different way in which women are controlled by the patriarchy. You know, like Florence Pugh has a controlling boyfriend / husband. Not really clear which it is. In the dream world, it's the husband. I'm not sure whether that's the case in the real world.
I'm pretty sure they were married in the real world, but yeah.
Yeah. Gemma Chan's character, who is the one that's in a relationship with Frank, the cult leader, she's so bought into the system that she wants to, control it herself, kind of thing, right? Like, so she's sort of upholding the patriarchy so that she can get as much power from it as she possibly can. And then there's Olivia Wilde's character, who is getting some kind of benefit, just sort of like rolling with the punches with the patriarchy and just using its sort of devices to, get something out of it for her own benefit or whatever. And like those stories more or less come to a head. Like Gemma Chan, in the end kills Frank and takes her place at the top. Olivia Wilde has to come to eventually comes to terms with the reality, or the sort of wall that she's put up around herself, I guess, and sort of like the mirage that she sort of bought herself into, and comes to terms with that when she reveals to Florence Pugh what's going on. And like Florence Pugh eventually sort of like finds a way to escape. Now, like, that doesn't mean like all this is great, but it does go somewhere, is my argument.
I'm glad you got that out of it, and I don't doubt what you just described is exactly what the filmmakers were going for, but especially in the case of Frank's wife, Gemma Chan, I did not see that in the text. I can extrapolate that because I can assume that was the intention. And again, I'm glad you got that, but I of all the unanswered questions that this movie leaves you with, and there are many, the thing I had probably the biggest beef with was Gemma Chan's character, stabbing Chris Pine and going, "You stupid man, it's my turn now." And that's the last we see of her, and that's the last we see of him. That to me was the tipping point of me no longer enjoying this movie and being pretty pissed off about it, to the point where I kept when Alice is running up the hill to try to escape and the goons are chasing her, I fully expected her to be like the last person she's got to get through is Gemma Chan's character.
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting it, and then when she didn't, I'm like, okay, so that was literally nothing. That was like, I don't want to say I disagree, because again, I think that was the intention for sure. And I'm glad you got that out of there. But none of these characters have meaningful arcs. Gemma Chan's character, more so than any of them, has a nothing burger of an arc. So, but I'm getting already worked up. I'm getting all heated because I do want to compliment this movie on a number of things, specifically that on paper, we touched on this in the pitch. On paper, this movie has everything. This had so much potential, and I think the thing I liked the most about it was its potential. It could have been a modern classic with a premise to rival The Truman Show, with a twist to rival The Usual Suspects, and a poignant, themes and ideas to rival, Persepolis or the Stepford Wives or any, feminist masterpiece. All the pieces were there, and the second they start to overlap with each other, it mushes, not they don't click together in any way whatsoever. So I do like what this movie could have been.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's why I kind of gave it more or less a positive review on when I wrote my Letterboxd review. It's just like I was down for what the movie was trying to say, even if it didn't necessarily come together. And like I said in that review, it's like the problem is like the intentionality of the different devices
I like that word.
in the movie weren't quite there. For example, and I know we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff, but like the airplane that essentially kicks everything off. There's an airplane that crashes that leads Florence Pugh to go out into the a desert, a place that she's told is dangerous and that she cannot leave the safety of the town. She goes out to help whoever has crashed in the desert, and then runs into, I don't know what we want to call that. No, I guess it's called the exit in the movie, right? Like, that's how to get out of the simulation. But like the plane, as we said in the plot summary, is like it doesn't come back in any particular way whatsoever. And there's earthquakes, and those don't have some sort of callback later on. There's very strange things that happen to Florence Pugh, like she gets squished by the pane of glass as she's washing it.
There's so many things that are not paid off. There's the wrapping the saran wrap around her head. Yeah. There's everything to do with the neighbor, all the neighbor who's already kind of half woke, struggling to make sense of the world. So her slitting her throat, her falling, the community gaslighting the fact that she slit her throat and fell. The mirror stuff, all the stuff with the mirrors. Like, everyone talks about the airplanes and the earthquakes going nowhere. The mirror stuff doesn't go anywhere. Like, literally the only hint that everything is not as it seems, that we're in a simulation, is the eggshells. I dug the eggshells. That actually hints that you're in a simulation.
Yeah.
The eggshells are literally the only ones that do any of that work.
How about this? How about eyes? The town is shaped like an eye.
Yeah.
There's every time she goes through the exit or is having some kind of hallucination, there's a ton of either you see the iris of an eye, or you see the dancers forming a circle with their legs that their legs themselves look like the iris of an eye. There's lots of sort of like references to eyes, but I'm not entirely certain what that's meant to
I just think
represent.
It's
like
the VR machine pries your eyes open like Clockwork Orange.
Yes, but like if that's the case, it's so that's lame. If that's like that's the symbol.
That's the one I had the least amount of problem with, like the
because
like crash and the yeah.
No, I don't know. It just feels like it. Like if all it is just like it's like or like how I interpret it is like she needs to wake up or something like that, right? But it just like it feels like they spent so much time using that symbology that it needed to have much more weight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
same with the mirrors. Scott, what do you?
I have nothing to add at this time. You've been doing some great back and forth, and I was just kind of letting it happen.
Because as I started going through the things that are wrong with this movie, I sort of realized you can file each of the like grievances and unanswered questions into stuff about the sci-fi premise that goes unanswered or doesn't make sense, stuff about the slow reveal of the mystery that goes unanswered or doesn't make any sense, and the building to the overall themes that go unanswered, doesn't make any sense, incomplete character arcs. And it's like kind of fun to like, because a lot has been said about this movie already on the internet, and like each one of those you can just file it under one of those headers. Because there's like the obvious like other stuff like, wouldn't they notice a young white surgeon woman go missing? How did this incredible AI technology end up in the hands of like 72 Discord moderators?
Okay, so this is all the stuff that like I really like. I've seen a lot of people make comments about that kind of stuff, and I really don't care. Yeah,
me too.
Like I
do
like
not care.
Yeah, it's like wouldn't somebody notice that like this hotshot doctor has gone missing? And it's like, I don't know, like I can kind of headcanon that like that
if they're willing to kill the men who sign up for this project, they're willing to help fake her death.
Yeah.
I agree. All that CinemaSin stuff is like easy pickings.
Yeah.
There is like much more fundamental flaws with this movie. Like, I'm glad you felt that the female characters had an arc. I felt like it was real, just like,
arc is a strong word. I don't know if I don't think I said arc, but I did like, yeah.
But I said this in Last Night in Soho. It's like, oh, the real villain is other women.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's maybe, in this case, which wasn't the case in Last Night in Soho. I think there was more purpose to having women be the instrument of their own oppression, right?
Fair.
If it didn't come off as sort of like distasteful, I think, the way that it did in Last Night in Soho.
Fair.
It's interesting that you say that you don't care about some of the sci-fi stuff that just doesn't quite add up.
I can forgive it.
Well, I was more referring to Greg's comment.
Oh, okay.
Because there is some of it that, like, you don't even have to really scratch to make you go, wait, what's up with that? And the biggest thing for me are the plane crash and the earthquakes. Because this is a virtual world. What's going on that's causing that? Why would that be included? Why would you include something that might ultimately result in a failure of the simulation? Why is there a plane crash at all? That doesn't make sense to me. Why are there earthquakes at all? It doesn't make sense to me.
Like those are questions that the movie is intentionally placing in your head and then not answering.
And then not
that to me is like slightly different than how does he keep Florence Pugh alive? Like that's not a question that the movie is positing, right? So like it doesn't really matter. It's like whatever. He put some water in her mouth. That's good enough for me. Like maybe you could have done it in a different way, but the reason that it's done that way is to show you that he's how irresponsible and how little he cares, right? Because he's just giving her a little bit of water, and it's kind of like grotesque the way that it happens. So it's like it's done with like intention and
but conversely, the glitches in the Matrix, that is stuff that actually does critically affect the plot of the movie and does not get resolved.
Absolutely.
And therein lies one of the things that perplexed me at the end. Like, what's going on with this virtual world that there would be those flaws, because there's no indication that the virtual world is anything other than perfect, except when it's not.
Yes.
And there's no explanation for why.
Hinges on that. Yeah.
Oh, good. Someone has put some thought into it. And it wasn't the screenwriter, unfortunately.
Yeah. I do want to say that the scene where they're sitting around the dinner table, followed by Jack betraying her and her being dragged out of the car, and maybe some people disagree, the then reveal after that it's all a simulation, that 20-minute chunk I quite liked. It's probably about the only part of this I keep in my fixes. I thought the confrontation was really, really well executed. I also loved the way she's like, please, I'm not crazy, you have to believe me. Because any of these movies where someone is like, please, you gotta believe me, I always get frustrated that they're not articulating themselves very well, and I'm like, well, don't say it like that. And I realize most movies can't happen if the person really does a good job of articulating their sanity. Or like in Old, when she's like, you need to believe me, I'm a museum director. I loved that, because I'm like, she said it the way she should have said it, and I loved that. Yeah, that whole scene worked really well for me. I don't know if you guys agree, but...
I think so. I think the only bit about it that maybe caught me off guard was maybe I'm mistaken, but does Frank not imply that he's slept with Alice?
Oh, I thought he was referring to when he caught them in his bedroom at the
Caught
party.
them fucking in his bedroom.
Oh, okay. So I misinterpreted.
That's how I read.
Good.
That's how I'd read that. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So it was just
Which
me
also,
watching
that
the
scene
movie.
kind of goes nowhere. Like, I mean, I guess it goes to the dinner scene, and it's a way that he can like leverage the fact that she's a liar, or like try to implicate her in being untruthful. But yeah, the scene where he early on sees her and Harry Styles having sex in his house, and she sees him, Harry Styles doesn't, really only serves to sort of add some tension to some salt in the dinner scene.
Yeah, and that's kind of it too. Like again, like it doesn't, they're interesting little tidbits and stuff like that, but they just don't add up to enough.
Yeah, the thing with Frank that disappoints me is that there's no good payoff to that exchange. Like, she confronts him at the dinner table and loses. Like, she loses that match with him. But she never then gets an opportunity to beat him.
And you know what's interesting? She actually loses to his wife. Like, he's sitting there, he's taking it, he's giving it back, and then she's finally like, the wife is like, enough. And she's the one who gets the final word, which again, when she stabs him later in the movie and is like, you dumb idiot, I'm taking over, I'm like, oh, then she's the mastermind.
But there's no payoff to that either.
There's no payoff to that either. So, like, whoever won that dinner fight scene, there's no round two. There's no round two with Frank, there's no round two with the wife.
And arguably, there should have been a round two with both of them. I would say.
And I would have loved to have seen Jack have to answer to himself, or at least maybe the other men as a proxy for his own poor choices. Because it is implied heavily that he loves her deeply, and he's like very misguided. And so he doesn't get an arc. He never has to like learn his lesson or atone for his sins. He just
never
gets clubbed over the head with a cocktail glass and dies. Which then begs the question, what was that about how women can die and men can't? Like, there's another dumb sci-fi cinema sins thing. Like,
I think the relationship between Jack and Alice, I think, has some reasonable flaws. Like, for one thing, like, what Jack is doing to her is pretty heinous. And the way he, like, when you get to see what he's done in the real world, which is like, he's kind of just like a really sniveling, selfish, unredeemable asshole in the real world. So, and I guess they're setting up us to hate him a lot, but then we turn around and Alice has trouble letting him go. Yeah. And I just like, when you've set him up to be that much of a cartoonish villain, you've kind of like undermined that quite a bit, because I don't don't buy that she would have to let him go. I think she would be quite happy to do so.
You need to either have her. You need to either make him cartoonishly bad and make it so that she's okay letting him go when the time comes, or you have to make him a little softer.
Yeah.
And really hammer in that, like, a bad person got a bad idea in his head, and he's doing what he thinks is right, but his logic is flawed, and he needs to be shown the error of his ways.
Do you remember that scene in the Truman Show where they're standing on the pier and his best friend is like, Truman, buddy, I hear you. I do. But if everyone is in on it, then I'd have to be in on it. And I'm your best friend, Truman. So it can't be like Harry Styles needed a monologue like that sort of paints exactly what you just said, Scott, where he's shown to be a well-meaning asshole with a bad idea, like a bad person who does love this woman. Like, yeah,
he loves her, but Frank has got he felt emasculated, he felt small. Frank got in his head with his YouTube videos and his podcast and planted this seed in a vulnerable guy who then did a terrible thing, which is a very timely piece of storytelling.
Yeah. Which I do want to mention, we are three white men talking about a movie about the patriarchy, specifically where the villain has a podcast about men talking. We did, our dear friend of the show, Glenna Showalter, was slated to be our guest and was not able to join us. So just if anyone listening is like, let's hear fucking three guys talk about this potential feminist masterpiece, we had every intention of including Glenna in this conversation, and at the last minute was not able to join. So just want to clear that up, because the villain is a white man with a podcast. It's kind of weird that we're talking about it.
We are aware of the irony. Thank you.
Yeah, the optics are.
The one thing I do really appreciate about this movie is that it does broach this sort of like era of snake oil philosophy that we're living through. You know, I feel like more movies need to address the Jordan Petersons of the world a lot more directly, because you know what they're doing is quite toxic, and I think rather villainous, to be perfectly frank about it. Like, Frank, got it. Yeah, but like, yeah. So I did like that, and like that's the thing about this movie is like there's so many like little pieces that I can kind of really enjoy, and because like Scott said off the top, like it's so well made, it really got me through a lot of like its shortcomings without being too upset. Like I've watched a lot of movies for this podcast where I wanted to shut it off right quick, you know, and this one wasn't. It was an easy watch as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, this one, I was interested to see where it went. As I said, like from start to finish, I was there, and then it ended, and I was like, "That's the ending, huh? Okay."
Yeah, I think that's why I was so mad about it, because I was entertained throughout, and then felt very disappointed in the payoffs. To circle back to what you're saying about those toxic villains in movies, I want that too, and I think this movie had the potential to do that, to shine a light on the Andrew Tates of the world and paint them as a villain, and it just really squandered that opportunity in a way that, like, I think I'm trying to think of another movie that has tried to play that angle, and the best I could think of is Ghostbusters Answer the Call, of like a wormy internet. So I love the podcast Behind the Bastards, and they did a really good couple episodes on Andrew Tate. And
just recently. Yep.
Very recently. I highly recommend them. I did not realize how insidious and villainous that guy's worldview is. And I would love to have seen a movie like this really put him in a villainous light. If not, maybe a feminist sci-fi drama like this, even just as a modern Bond villain. We're getting a little off topic here, but I think you could make a great modern Bond villain off a sniveling tech nerd who's riling up all the young men in the world to hate women and fuck the system. We're overdue for Jordan Peterson as movie villain, and I can't wait for the movie that gets it right, because a couple movies have tried and failed.
Yeah. Off to fixes, I guess.
Yeah, let's get into the fixes then. I think I'm excited. I think we all have a different approach because this movie had tons of potential, and it is absolutely salvageable. So we'll hear from our friends at the Alberta Podcast Network and fix this movie.
Calling all new and emerging content creators in BC and Alberta. In case you haven't heard of StoryHive, they've been supporting storytellers in Western Canada since 2013. This year, they're celebrating their 10th anniversary with their biggest edition yet. The StoryHive Anniversary Documentary Edition is funding 80 short documentaries on any local story you're passionate about. You could get $20,000 in production funding, training and mentorship, and distribution on Telus Optic TV and Stream Plus. If you live in BC or Alberta and you have an idea for a short documentary, now is the time to send in your pitch. Send in your application by February 28th at storyhive.com/apply. Your story, your narrative.
In a world where boring dinners and ungrateful children make cooking almost unbearable.
Whoa, that's a little too dramatic.
Let's try this again. I'm Heather Dyer.
I'm Erin Wager. And I'm Sarah Somasundaram. This is Three Kitchens, a podcast about home cooking.
Whether you like cooking or you just like eating, join us to talk about food. We'll have new episodes of Three Kitchens every Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Three Kitchens. They'll tickle your funny bone, whet your appetite, and warm your heart.
Did that guy think he was Bruce Wayne?
I kind of liked it, actually.
He made us sound super badass.
Welcome back to I Have Some Notes. Don't worry, darling. We will fix this movie. Who wants to start? Because from our chat early on, I think we've all got a different approach.
Okay. I'll give this a little bit of a shot just because it's very small and maybe it'll be like a piece that you guys can kind of like move into your fixes. But I was just thinking about like Olivia Wilde's character and how at the end she reveals that she's been aware that she's in a simulation the entire time, and the reason that she kind of upholds this or enjoys being in the simulation is that she has lost her kids, and within the simulation her kids have been simulated for her, right? I think like that kind of makes her a really interesting character and sort of like underutilized because of it, because like her husband doesn't like have anything to do with the kids, and that sort of like makes me wonder like, well, what's his relationship to the children, right? And like does he not care about them at all, or like is he, are they not his kids, or something like that? And I think there's a real interesting opportunity to make that relationship between the two of them really dramatic, and also to parallel Florence Pugh's character a little bit more. You notice early on in the movie, like her kids are running around and things like that, but like she doesn't really pay much attention to them.
She just drinks and complains about them mostly.
And
gossips,
she's like somewhat dismissive of them. And I think that it would be very interesting if like maybe she was even a little bit more dismissive of them, in a way that sort of like kind of tweaks Alice, that like Florence Pugh's character, that like something's a little off here. It can be one of those little sort of like small breadcrumbs of like, you're in this idyllic place and yet this woman hates her children or something like that, right? And I think the way that can play out is that Nick Kroll, who plays Olivia Wilde's husband, he can, like, in the real world they had kids, and then they lost their kids, and in their grief and stuff like that, he kind of like moved on a little bit faster than she did. She was stuck in in depression, and in his mind, like, he was going to use this simulation as a way of like helping her, like it's his way of trying to like make things better for her. And then he wants to simulate the kids for her, but for Olivia Wilde's character, like that's actually torture, like putting those kids in front of her all the time. And that can be sort of like a confrontation that they can have towards the end, so that you can put a cap on that relationship, right? Like
it's torture, and she doesn't know why.
Yeah. Well, either that or she understands that she's in the simulation. But like she's dismissive of the children because she doesn't want them around. And in the end, she tells Nick Kroll's character, like, you weren't helping me. You've been torturing me with this the entire time. And like it's another interesting way of like dealing with the patriarchy issue, where like, man knows best. Like I'm going to help, but I'm not going to do it in a way that I'm not going to do it in a way that's actually talking to you and figuring out how I can help or whatever. I'm just going to do the thing, right? Yeah.
I guess it does have to be a bit of like sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, you first.
Oh, it has to be a bit of a like, I thought this is what I wanted, but because if it's torture from the outset, she'd be like, well, get me out of here. So it is maybe a little bit like, I trusted you. You said this would help. I thought this is what I wanted, but.
Well, and it's
I
also
like
possible.
It as
it's also possible she doesn't feel like she can escape, right? Like she has grokked to the fact that she's in a simulation, but she's like, she feels powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah. I like that. I like the idea that like she's been essentially kidnapped the way that Alice has, but she's figured out what's going on. Like she understands that she's in that simulation, right? But she's kind of playing along.
It's interesting you use the word kidnap there, which is objectively what these husbands have done to their wives. But there's a line that the doctor says during the scene where he's doing the, I suppose, the entrance interview for Jack, where he says, "Your chosen wife," which strongly implies that some of the wives in the simulation aren't actually married to their husband in the simulation and have been actually abducted, like not just like spousal abduction, but are like women who were abducted by men. And that's not paid off, and I feel like it should be. So I like the idea of Alice at first being told she's crazy and the women kind of going along with it, and then as the third act rolls around and things start to unravel, I think more of the women should start to believe her, and there should be like a general revolt. I don't think it should just be Alice.
That is my fix for her.
Hooray!
The other side of the reveal.
Yeah, the last we see of those women shouldn't just be them looking uneasily around. They should also like be on board at that point.
And the last thing we should see of the men shouldn't be them going, "It's fine, don't worry, darling." It should be them groveling and sniveling on their knees for forgiveness and their lives.
As the simulation comes crashing down around them, actually. Because I'd like to slip in a little change that I think might help resolve some of the issues with like the plane and with the earthquakes. I had originally said kind of up front before we started recording, I don't know that the VR is working for me. And the more I think about it, maybe it does, but maybe it needs to be a little more immersive than that. Maybe instead about full virtual reality, they should be stuck in an augmented reality. So they have been physically taken to a place out in a remote area, but they're being like, they're rigged up and they're seeing this idyllic 50s world. They just aren't aware that they're in the modern world, in this little commune out in the middle of nowhere. So, and therein lies the opportunity for a plane crash to have attracted attention because it breaches the AR somehow. And there's a reason why they shouldn't go too far, because they would leave the area that the AR is working in. And like, I think that would be a very easy solution that would also solve even the questions the movie doesn't want to resolve, like how are they eating? How are they staying alive? Well, because they're eating and staying alive. They just don't know that they're not in this perfect 50s like simulation.
That's sick. I love that a lot, Scott. That's it, the same twist but more elegant. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah. So they're just seeing this world. And I think that the part of the glitches in the Matrix are coming because the women are no longer buying into it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like it's partially sustained by their own brainwashing and their own suspension of disbelief. And as Alice starts to see the cracks, the simulation starts to fail for her. And then that can lead into the third act where more of the women start to realize that something's wrong and the whole simulation starts to fall apart, basically.
Sick. I love that a lot. You have tightened up what I was already going to pitch.
Excellent. We're all dovetailing together.
Dovetails together, yeah. Because what I was going to pitch keeps the twist, but what I'm about to say works just as fine with your version, possibly better with what I'm going with. So yeah, like I said, I love the confrontation. I love Jack's betrayal where they drag her out of the car, and then we find out the twist, yada, yada, yada. That whole chunk, move it up 20 minutes in the movie, have it come at about the true halfway mark, not the hour 10, hour 15. Have it come a little earlier. And then all my fixes work out from there. Keep all that. Great. It's a simulation. We talk about the cracks in the Matrix, the glitches in the system. The earthquakes are not a glitch. The plane crash is not a glitch. The mirrors are not a glitch. The only thing that shows a glitch in the Matrix is the eggshell thing. So I basically you cut all the things that are not anything, that are just nonsense, and you replace it with glitches in the Matrix. Some suggestions I have. She has that scene with when she gets off the trolley to go chase the plane crash, and the guy's like, "This is as far as I go. Can't go any farther." That guy's an NPC with only so many canned lines, and instead of her running off into the desert to chase a plane crash, he's like, "Hey, you have a great day there, sweetheart." And she goes, "Please don't call me sweetheart." Because this also can reinforce some of the patriarchal themes. Sure. "Don't call me sweetheart, please. Just, I'm asking you not to." "Okay, whatever you say there, sweetheart." "No, seriously, I need you to not say that to me, please." "Okay there, sweetheart. You have a good day there." And it's just why are you being so fucking weird, dude? One of those first ones. Then the eggshell thing hits. I think that neighbor, who's sort of, realizes something is wrong but can't articulate why and is being told she's crazy. I think instead of her slitting her throat, falling off the building, having a freak out at the party, I think exactly what you said, Scott, about the plane crash is an accident that they really witness. In the notes I had here, she has some kind of accident in the home that has no consequences. She accidentally lights her garden on fire, and then the garden's back the next day. And she cannot figure out why. And it's driving her nuts. And then Florence Pugh starts having the same things. Why is there no eggs in the eggshell unless I crack it directly over the frying pan? I had another one. Oh, when she goes to steal her neighbor's file out of the doctor's briefcase. In the movie, it's all blanked out. It should just be empty. It should just be there's no file, because why would they keep a file of a crazy person in the virtual reality?
Yeah.
So yeah, all those things need to actually be showing cracks in the Matrix and not just head scratching why are there earthquakes? Scratch, scratch, scratch. Any of them that are red herrings need to push towards suggesting that Frank and the Victory Project are manipulating everyone. Because as I kind of said, the simulation as a twist thing is inherently easy to guess. You can even kind of peg it from the trailer if it wasn't spoiled for you outright. But the real twist is that they're not all being manipulated by Frank. The men are manipulating the women.
And Frank is manipulating the men, arguably.
Yeah, but not in the kidnapped virtual reality way.
Yeah,
he's not manipulated. Sure. Yeah. You're right, yes.
But augmented reality in our version.
Augmented, yes. So any of those red herrings should have the audience thinking, what's Frank doing? What's the Victory Project doing? Is it nerve gas? Is he got everyone under his thumb? And then the real twist is that, the men are in on it. So great. That's how you get to the table scene. When we come back after her education, they try to hint at it. I think they were going for this, but some modern pop song in her head keeps being no, I remember a song that was written after 1950. Why do I know the lyrics to Mad World?
Like a Virgin, yeah.
like a virgin or something, right? And it finally like undoes the re-education. And in the movie that kind of happens, but she has that moment of like, wait, what the fuck? And then clubs Harry Styles over the head with a cocktail glass. Instead, she should finally be like awoken and start, like you said, actively rallying the women to the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Again, way easier to do if it's an augmented reality, but even in the virtual reality, rally the women, get them all agreeing that this is some bullshit. So have some of those poor foresight by the men who programmed this, like, oh, women will never ask questions about that. Like, use some of the systems of control against the men, because that was the other big problem I had with the ending, is she just escapes. They lapse control for just long enough for her to wriggle out.
Yep.
She doesn't learn to take control for herself. She doesn't subvert the patriarchy. She doesn't flip the script. She just gets out of the constraints.
Yeah.
And it would be a more meaningful arc if she, alone or with other women, organized, found the strength to overcome, as opposed to just get out of the bad situation. And so that is what the third act is, her and the other women organizing, essentially. And then it all culminates in a showdown where all the women are armed with glitches in the Matrix. All of the men are sniveling and groveling for their lives or freaking out because they're going to die, right? And then they all escape. Or maybe they all have to stay for some reason, and that's when she wriggles out. But my biggest beef with this movie is that her escape is nothing more than a literal escape, and it doesn't mean anything. It's not part of her arc.
Yeah, she needs to overcome it.
Yeah.
Not just escape from it. I agree with you. And I feel like that can also be partly facilitated by adding in that second confrontation with both Frank and Shelley, which we didn't get in this movie. In the third act,
that round two.
Yeah, in the third act, she should get an opportunity to finally like put Frank in his place and put Shelley in her place, basically.
Yeah, one or the other, frankly. I really,
arguably both, I would say.
Both, yeah.
Because the movie,
it could be such a great metaphor for class struggle as well if the two wealthy people who run it, like Shelley benefits from the patriarchy as much as Frank does, but they're both upper class, they control the town, they control the economy. You could even start wringing some like class solidarity themes out of this, as well as patriarchal themes, by having the final confrontation be against both of them. Because the table scene was against both of them.
That's where I was going to go with that, is the table scene is against both of them. And in the end, which is one of the reasons why Shelley betraying Frank in the movie as is came out of nowhere. Because there's nothing that builds up to that moment. And
that's what the earthquakes were about.
And in this version, it's rewritten that she is all in as his partner. She gets off on having as much control over these women as Frank does. And so having an opportunity for Alice and the other women to tear her down as well, I mean, that works.
Yeah. Doesn't necessarily have to go in, but in my notes as well, what if she's the one with the AI kids? And Bunny is as duped as the rest of them?
Alice or Shelley?
Shelley. And that was her reason for like agreeing to be in paradise, was like, I get to have my kids back. I helped Frank build this. I get my kids. All of you shut up or you'll kill my babies. I don't know that it's a great fix. That's why I wasn't too hung up on it. But as I was typing, I was like, oh, that actually kind of...
I kind of like her as like being incredibly selfish. Is like, if they're, if both of those characters are sort of like at the height of the class, like they should definitely both be as close to mustache twirling as possible.
Then what if Bunny has the AI kids when Alice, she's the last true believer in the neighborhood. Alice finally shakes her out of it and she goes, oh my God, my kids are dead. like, it would be devastating to find out, like, oh, these AI kids are, like, when all her memories come rushing back.
Yeah.
She has to reckon with the fact that, like, she's been parenting AI kids. But maybe then she's like, oh, I guess that explains why I just drink and make fun of them.
Yeah, I do kind of like Greg's take on it, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing about this and, like, being, like, I've talked to Aaron about this and, like, being parents of a lost child. Like, one of the things that she said she appreciated was, like Olivia Wilde's character wasn't just, like, she didn't dissolve into, like, a puddle of grief or whatever. She kind of liked the take on that. So I, like, the way I was approaching it was trying to, like, you know, somewhat preserve that a little bit, that you know, that she's still, you know, has a lot of agency in the way that she's gone about dealing with the simulation.
Yeah, I think that's valid and definitely a perspective that you and Aaron can bring that the rest of us maybe can't. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, not many people can, but yeah.
I think we did it.
Yeah, we've tightened some screws. We'll say that.
Yeah, and there's a lot to go over. It's a really interesting movie. I think that's what at the end of the day, that's the thing that I think I like about it the most is, like, I'll watch this over, you know, any, like, popcorn slop any day of the week, just because, like, I spent so much time after having watched it just sort of thinking about it and thinking about what it was trying to accomplish and stuff like that. It was just like, you know, it at least it tickled me in that particular way.
Yeah,
See,
I'd rather.
Oh, good.
Sorry, I would rather a movie that makes me think than a movie that just kind of washes over me. That's for sure.
See, and I guess that's where I disagree. I would rather watch some schlocky popcorn stuff like Morbius that I know is stupid, because this I felt let down by. I felt a deep disappointment in the potential that was squandered that made me much more frustrated than just, like, watching something like Morbius where I'm like, well, I knew what I was signing up for. I'm the asshole who sat there for 2 hours and watched Morbius of my own accord. I have no one to blame but myself. Whereas this, I was deeply invested in 90% of this movie, and it couldn't have let me down. I felt cucked by this movie. Like, I really... It was infuriating how disappointing it was that I have a hard time recommending it to people. I've not since Rise of Skywalker, where I've been so disappointed by such a half-baked, sloppy movie that was brimming with potential. Whereas I didn't expect miracles from Morbius, and so I wasn't surprised that it was nothing. Like...
to that, I would just say better to love than lost than it never loved at all. Like, I would rather watch something that was engaging and interesting and then left me disappointed than watching fucking Morbius, which I did not enjoy one single bit, and I will never return to again.
This is the thing we have to agree to disagree on. Because I was devastated by how pointless this movie was.
Here's my take on it. Nobody goes into making a film expecting the movie's going to be bad, with very few exceptions. The 99% of people who make a film, who act in a film, who edit a film, who light a film, who direct a film, don't expect that it's going to make it to the final cut and be like, oh, this is Birdemic. Like, most people aren't expecting that.
Yeah.
And to me, it's almost more interesting to see a movie where it's so well executed, but something is wrong, and try to untangle what that is, as opposed to something where there were so many bad decisions along the way where it's like, oh, well, I mean, someone halfway through this should have seen where this was going and pulled the plug. Like, I would rather, in the end, see a Don't Worry, Darling and try to figure out what happened, as opposed to watch a Morbius and know what happened. Like,
fair.
Yeah. I think any movie that has, like, an earnest attempt and fails is, like, I think there's always value in that, in the sense that, like, it can teach you something about film, you know? Like, that's why I watch, like, bad movies and like good bad movies. The ones where like The Room and stuff like that, where someone was earnestly trying to make a good movie and failing miserably, but it reveals to you the kinds of things that are important in film to accomplish in order to create a good movie.
To frame it a little differently, it's one thing when a cynical cash grab turns out to be a crappy movie.
Yeah.
As opposed to an earnest attempt to make a good movie turning out to be a letdown. When a cynical cash grab turns out to be good, that's the surprise. When an earnest attempt to make a thematic sci-fi movie fails, that's the surprise. And so, yeah.
The cynical cash grab like ends up having no value whatsoever and being an entire waste of time. Whereas, something with the best of intentions at least has some kind of value.
Yeah.
I wholly agree, but I also want to circle back something. I was not going to repeat myself, and I am not going to repeat myself. I made my case. But, Scott, you said something when you're like, someone along the process should have saw where this was going. I feel like that is true for this movie. Where, like, someone should have been like, wait, are we not going to resolve the earthquake thing? Like, yeah. So I think that applies to this movie too, but that's neither here nor there.
Fair enough.
Because we got listener comments. Thank you to everyone who contributed. Whenever we solicit these, we appreciate you sharing your thoughts, gives us new perspectives, gives us something to engage with you about. So thank you to those of you who contributed. Robin from Cinematological says, a tremendously shot piece of nonsense. It attacks incels, Jordan Peterson, techno-radicalization, with no actual understanding of those topics. Would be far more insidious if the women weren't kidnapped physically, but were trapped as AI approximations that had become self-aware.
That is an episode of Black Mirror, isn't it? No, I'm not joking.
It is. It's like a Star Trek one.
Yeah. That's exactly the one I'm thinking of. And I mean, great. Like, tease that out into 2 hours. Sure. That's also a good idea. Robin, that's also a good idea. Write that movie is basically what I'm saying.
At Dima says, everyone dies because their internet sucks.
Yeah. What happens if they accidentally get disconnected because the power goes out or the wireless craps out for a day?
Yeah.
That one made me laugh when I read that.
That's why you make it AR and you have them off in the desert somewhere. There you go.
Tack says, the classic WTF is going on. One of my favorite tropes / subgenres. Many of the notes I'm tempted to give are tantamount to stirring a bowl of M&Ms to enhance the flavor.
That is a great metaphor. Wow.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Lots of valid choices would be equally inverted to equally valid choices. Creeping horror is all about style. But let's get to noting. Make Alice's mental state more clear and her actions more understandable. The world doesn't have to make sense, but she does. Either stick closer to 50s era culture or make the anachronisms part of the creep factor for Alice. Give us payoffs and setups.
Give us
payoffs. Yeah, that's what I was saying about the music.
To the setups, yeah.
Yeah, give us payoffs to the setups, yeah. That's what I was saying about the music, and I think they tried to hint at it and it maybe got cut or wasn't fully executed. But yeah, if there's a modern pop song stuck in her brain that is they can do all the reprogramming they want, but you can't
fool memory.
Yeah, you can't trick a memory.
Yeah, and this movie is full of payoffs with no setup and setups with no payoffs.
That's a great way to phrase it.
I also like the comment about how the world doesn't have to make sense, but she does, because he's right. There are a couple occasions in the movie where Alice does something for no reason. Like, why does she wrap her head in saran wrap?
This damn saran wrap thing.
I get that she's feeling trapped. She's subconsciously recognizing that something is wrong, but that action didn't track for me from her previous actions, and it really kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, she needs to be logical in an illogical world. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it I think I might have said this off air, but there's a lot of sort of Lost style mystery box type things going on, where like the event in and of itself is cool and creepy, but yeah, it doesn't really make a ton of sense for the character.
Not a lot of listener comments for this movie, and there were actually quite a few listeners who chimed in with, I haven't seen this one yet. That seems to have been fairly common, actually. A lot of people either had, like, I had not heard of this film until you guys brought it up. I don't know if it was just that I totally missed the boat on its marketing or if it wasn't well marketed, but I get the impression that this one flew under a lot of people's radars.
Yeah, it kind of got a lot more attention because of the things that were swirling around the film. Mm-hmm. For example, while Olivia Wilde was presenting the movie at Cannes, she was served with I think it was custody papers, like right divorce on papers, stage.
Yeah,
was it divorce paper? Yeah,
might have been, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and then there was an incident where people were trying to guess whether Harry Styles had spat on Chris Pine during a screening or something like that. Like,
I remember that.
Yeah,
yeah.
So there's a bunch of weird stuff that was going on around it. So.
I'm glad we didn't spend any time on it, but yeah. I am somewhat versed in the drama that surrounded this movie. So here are the Cole's notes. First of all, Shia LaBeouf was supposed to be Jack, and then apparently had an affair with Olivia Wilde, which ended her relationship with Jason Sudeikis.
Whoops.
Which I don't think the timeline actually works out, but a Letterboxd comment said the best thing about this movie is it gave us Ted Lasso. I don't think that's true. I don't think the timeline works, but it's fun to think about. And then Olivia Wilde was like throwing shade at Francis Pugh. I don't think
Florence
Pugh.
What did I say? Francis,
yeah.
Florence Pugh. I probably said Francis a couple times in the episode. There's a bunch of very funny interviews where Chris Pine could not look more checked out, and Harry Styles is rambling as baby Hollywood guy who doesn't know how to talk to the camera or talk to the interviewers. Where he says something like, well, it's one of those, it's a great movie. It's like a real go to the theater, watch a movie. And Chris Pine's just like rolling his eyes and like, looks like he wants to kill himself. Which all culminated in the did he or did he not spit on her? There was a bunch of backstage drama. The big ones being that she got served divorce papers at a convention. Florence Pugh stopped doing promo for it. Francis Pugh.
Florence,
I got it right. Okay, now I'm just gaslighting myself. Is this a simulation? She just stopped doing press at one point for it. She's like, I'm just not going to talk to people about this movie. So there was a lot of that. I saw a trailer for it in the theater, so I just knew it was coming out. But yeah, a lot of people were like, is this what all the drama was about? This is what we're like spitting on each other for?
I was listening to the Slash, I guess it's not the Slash film, the film cast review of Don't Worry Darling, and one of them had mentioned that they hope that like Olivia Wilde gets to direct more movies because they felt like she was like it was well made. It just wasn't like maybe let down by the script, right? And I think I kind of feel the same. Like I think if she gets to make another movie, I'd be interested in seeing what she can put together.
100%. She again, and I said this right off the top, and I'll bookend this episode with it. It is a technically excellent film. It is good to watch. It's just the story that it tells. Not all the way there.
Not good to think about, or not in the ways it wants you to think about it. Yeah. So, but I'm done thinking about this movie for a while because it's the end of the episode. Thank you to all of you for listening. You can follow us Facebook.com/I have some notes, at I have some notes on Twitter, at I have some notes pod on Instagram, and wherever it is that you're listening to this, Apple, Google, what have you, please give us a like, a review, a subscribe. We appreciate it.
Hey, so Frank has terrible advice for men in this film and is a bad podcast host guy. But you know who has really good advice for men and is a really good podcast host guy? It's Herman Viegas, friend of the show, and he has his own show called Modern Manhood, where he interviews guests who offer varied perspectives on masculinity in the modern world. And you should definitely check that out right now at albertapodcastnetwork.com.
And tune in 2 weeks when we're going to be joined by the fellows from the Talking Smack podcast, Alex and Josh, for Thor, Love and Thunder.
Until then, I've been your host, Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
I'm Greg Beaver. Keep watching the skies
for crashing planes.